I'll let the two of you kick it off. But thank you so much for being here. And Angela, I'm really looking forward to having you here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that introduction, Casey. And nice to see you, Angela. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks, everyone, as we join today. We're really excited to kick this off and to welcome Angela. She is an incredible leader in the industry. CMO could practically be an appendix to her name in the way that doctors have PhDs. She has the same level of expertise and has brought it across her experiences over the last several years, both from the agency side and from in-house, from Relativity to Fox to Dentsu to YouTube. Now, she has straddled both that agency and in-house at the intersection of brands and influencers and agency work and creative. She's an incredible leader, and so we're really excited to have her take on Gen Z, everyone's favorite or least favorite generation. So thank you so much for joining, Angela.
Thank you, Chris. Excited to be here.
Of course. So let's dive in if we can. We'll start probably moving through this in three sections. So first, we'll level set a little bit about Gen Z for our audience and what it's like to market and approach them and your insights. And then we'll move a little bit to what YouTube specifically is doing as they build and grow their relationships with Gen Z. And then some takeaways for some of the folks joining us in ways they might be able to apply to their own brands, if that sounds good.
That sounds great.
Awesome. So Gen Z, everyone's favorite generation. We talk a lot about defining Gen Z out in the press, but aside from the obvious age question, and I know that they're a lot younger than any of us would like to acknowledge, how do you personally and you at YouTube define them in what makes them tick inside? What makes Gen Z special and different?
That I have learned, and now I feel like I've had a few alphabet letters in my marketing career in terms of generations to market to, is that they're probably one of the most authentic and transparent generations, and I think they require that from brands. They're probably the one generation that really looks to brands in terms of their brand voice and how they want to speak up on issues they care about. You know, what are the ways brand can help impact their life? And I think COVID was probably a great example for all of us to think about the way in which we show up to provide support, to bridge, whether that might be, think about the events that were taken away from them or let's say this, reimagined during the last 6 months that, many of us would take for granted in terms of rites of passage. And so brands and platforms have actually become bridges to continue connecting with their community, with finding joy, finding learning opportunities, or just finding ways to cope in terms of mental health being one of the biggest issues that we think about when we market to Gen Z during this period of time. So I think we've probably been given an opportunity to reintroduce ourselves and to come with a more authentic and transparent view of what we do, how it is that we do it, and what we can provide in terms of a resource or a connectivity point.
Awesome. And, I love the comments about transparency and authenticity. I think they may be more transparent than any of us even desire in seeing into their real lives. And we talk a lot about consumers in the past being engaged in a transaction with a brand and Gen Z bringing their whole selves to the brand outside of that transaction. In bringing their whole selves, Brianne Kimmel, a young VC founder, was quoted in the New York Times 2 weeks ago saying she thinks a lot of people can claim to understand Gen Z, but don't really listen or take them seriously. And this is a bit of a blunt question and maybe a little bit of a softball, but should we take Gen Z seriously? Are they fully formed enough? Do they have enough purchasing and consumption power? Will they grow up more? Will who they are change and evolve given the sheer ramifications of society around them over time? What is it that we're looking to take away from Gen Z now and in the future as they grow up? And how wary do we need to be of changing winds with what is a generation that's still very young in that vein?
Yeah, I think we've all been there, right? We've all been a generation that's been informed by our context. And I think this generation, more than any other generation, is probably both shaping and being shaped. And I think that's the power of this generation, is because of the platforms that they have available to them. They can connect with their neighbor or, someone around the world in a nanosecond. And the expectation is that that is their community. When they take on social issues, they come from it with a belief that everyone is entitled to a level of equality, not fighting for equality, but imbued with equality. And so there's just it's a shift for us, because I think whereas we probably think a generation evolves into being evolved, I think they actually believe that they were born evolved, and they are helping us in our evolution in terms of becoming a more, really just a more awake society in terms of how we think about the line or division between brand, product, and, whether that's a policy or whether that's the way in which we show up in the world. And these are issues from racial injustice to, gender equality to sexuality. These things are just innate in their acceptance of, versus sort of getting us to accept. So I think that what we're seeing on our platform is that, and I think what I've really loved about this generation is that they have empathy. I think they're one of the most empathic generations. I think they lead with active listening and expect that from us. Lead with, I want to understand before I judge. And so it's actually enabled us to think, how do we show up in a way that we are not just telling them what to do, we're reflecting what it is that they do. And I think there is a lot of beauty in that. And we see that on our platform, and in the way, I want to speak specifically to the way we responded to COVID, because we really took cues from what they were already doing to help shape how we can help, again, bridge the gaps that were sort of evident when the world shut down.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm super excited to hit on the With Me campaign, because I think it hits home with them. In that vein, it seems like there are a couple of digital brands, shall we say, that or global brands that came about right around the same time as YouTube, and some of the other brands that'll go unnamed have taken different approaches, right? Whole new lines of business, chasing upstarts, cloning different features of other platforms. And YouTube has taken a different approach in building and growing its relationships to creators and its audience, and has managed to stay on top in terms of the online video and community space. What is it about YouTube's approach that has allowed you to stay on top? And when you approach Gen Z, what's your plan to stay on top with them? And to tease a little bit, we'll get straight into the With Me campaign as an example of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that, is perhaps different about YouTube is that it is an economy of creators. So all content, I would say 99.9% of the content created is actually from individual creators or, media companies, whether those are really small or really big. And so the community itself is something that allows different interests to really be sort of, top of mind. Trends are actually generated by the users. And so I think the one thing that we see Gen Z is like, what are they interested in? How are we seeing that change? One of the most beautiful trends coming out of the work around racial justice was being Black in, and it was looking at the experience of being Black in, and it would be Detroit or it might be Nairobi, but it was the ability to understand that personal experience from the voice of a creator. And this was a trend, again, we didn't create the trend. It wasn't a brand trying to force something into existence. It was actually, we have this whole team of culture and trends researchers who all they do is listen to what is happening on the platform in order to identify the seeds of trends, so that we can begin to see, now, is this something that's just happening? Is that a local trend? Is it regional? Does it become global? Does it transcend smaller communities into larger ones? Does it become a PR story? Does it become a brand campaign? And so a lot of the work that we do is not what we think we should be telling, this generation, is what are they telling us, and how do we amplify that through the work and the channels that we have available to us. And I think we see this, whether it's, and it could be something as beautiful. I mean, I wanted to pull, I had a couple of examples that I wanted to pull, but like, think about what's happening. You learn to cut your hair from a creator on YouTube. You learned yoga from a creator on YouTube. You learned, one of the things that we saw was a beautiful trend. You saw sourdough in the very beginning. Everyone wanted a sourdough kit. And by the end, you were actually learning about exquisite pastas that might be actually going out of style in, it's like small villages in Italy because of pasta grannies. And someone actually said, if you want to keep this legacy alive, go to YouTube, create the video, and then people will find it. Van life is another example of people who were limited in terms of their travel opportunities, but a trend that's been on YouTube for a while became sort of the summer like Bon Voyage, and people were taking and renting or converting campers and whatnot and taking to see, their local environments in a way that we'd never seen before. And it was just, again, an extension of what was already happening, amplified through some of the work that we were able to do on our platform.
Well, and I think what's really incredible about that is, we all want to meet consumers where they live their lives, right? Like that's the key these days to finding and engaging them. Determining where and how they live their lives. You obviously have an incredible amount of data coming in from the platform, and everyone likes to talk about big data, and lots of data, but there can be such a thing as too much data or the right data. So when you look at these trends and you look at the data coming in, how do you zero in on which waves to let sort of crash to shore and which ones to surf? And in that vein, when you have a successful surf in the way that the With Me campaign has been, for our listeners who aren't aware, there's this incredibly successful campaign that YouTube has had in the COVID landscape. This cook with me, work out with me, this With Me trend. What is it that about that trend that said, okay, we're going to zero in here above all else, and this is why we chose to surf that wave? And what are some waves that you let go, and why, when you look at trends that are out there on the platform, but maybe don't make sense from a brand point of view to lean into?
Well, the With Me trend was actually a trend that was started on the platform 10 years ago. And so it's actually been building over time. And the trend is a very simple one, which is taking the banal task of life that would normally be sort of isolated tasks and putting them in view so that communities could engage with them. So study with me. And it's literally, imagine someone just studying, but having a camera on them so you don't feel alone. And if you think about this generation, I think their greatest fear is being separated from their devices or from one another. And those things are actually almost synonymous. And so we took this trend, and as the world was starting to shut down, and we were first here to provide authoritative content. What do you need to know? Where do you get that information? And it quickly evolved into, I remember the trends team sitting down and saying, we've got this beautiful trend. We'd actually just launched it just, because it was something that was sort of, as you say about the wave, it's like you started to feel the power of that wave and you knew it was something to ride, but it didn't turn out to be what we thought, which was, hey, we'll just talk about what people are doing in isolation. Well, the world was in isolation. What a beautiful way to actually bring them closer together in a time of real need. And so the With Me trend really became the central thesis of our COVID response. And we had Stay Home With Me, and it was all the things that you could do when you're staying home to feel less alone and more connected. And again, the banal task of eating and cleaning and, obviously studying everyday life that we were now missing. And that then evolved with, we had Stay Home With Me, Get By With Me. So now we're in it. What do we do? How do we how do we stay sane? How do we stay healthy? How do we stay connected? How do we think about work? We also had Graduate With Me. So again, one of those gaps that we weren't able to sort of enjoy together as a community in terms of a physical presence, we actually brought online and worked with, celebrities and creators to have a commencement ceremony. And it was honestly, it's one of the most beautiful pieces we've done in terms of being purposeful and enjoyable and relevant to that audience, and the feedback was fantastic. And then we sort of evolved that. We're about to launch the next phase, which is, now that we've gotten by and we're in it, how do we find a way to continue to be okay? And I think, like, watching this curve of how people are dealing with it around the world, and it's very localized, it enabled us to really partner with artists to do live streams, so reimagining the concert experience. We partnered with Andrea Bocelli around Easter, and actually had a performance that was live from the Duomo in Milan, which was the first time it's ever been done, to really thinking about, like, what does a TV show look like? Trevor Noah is like live streaming, and sort of, it was a moment of like, oh my God, what do we do? And it's like, we do what we've always done on YouTube. We just turn the video on and have a conversation with our audience. And that intimacy just became a way to actually sort of take down the wall that TV normally has, and really make it about our living room experience that you and I are having, Craig. And so it wasn't just a creator. Now it was everyone who needed to stay in touch with their community, whether that was a celebrity, a newscaster, an author, or just you and I.
I think, and staying in touch with your community and being in touch with the world around you is a really important piece of that content, right? How you create that engaging platform. I think what's unique about what I've seen as well is we've all seen the jokes about K-Boomer and all of these other pieces, right? But YouTube actually has a really interesting role at the centerpiece of society, particularly with cross-generational content, right? The people watching Gen Z creators aren't just Gen Z. And at the same time, the recent study shows that 52% of Gen Z lives at home and after college, right? And that number was still in the high to mid 40s even before COVID. It just sort of skyrocketed there. So with so many people living in multi-generational homes and so many different generations looking online and turning online to different content, where do you see that cross-generational intersection and influence come into play? And for YouTube, how do you look at yourselves as a platform that really is one of the central platforms in building that? We talk about a traditional linear network and they all have their target demos, but YouTube really has every target demo. It's just a matter of connecting the dots between generations.
Yeah, there's a trend called, there's actually a great channel called Dad, How Do I? And it's sort of a dad giving advice on, again, everyday tasks and how you do them. And I thought, here's an example actually of an older creator who actually has a Gen Z audience. And you have sort of then the reverse. You've got, a Gen Z, creator like Chloe Ting, and you've got, millions of people, logging on every day to see her actually do these abs challenge, because we all are trying to keep in shape while sourdough. And then you've got someone like David Blaine, who we just partnered with to do his latest magic stunt, which was, ascending 25,000 feet with just balloons, skydiving safely to the ground. And, that was an audience, our highest concurrent views ever of a YouTube original, but it just actually showed that these cross-generational audiences will find a moment when it is relevant, or sometimes just when it's a magical moment to let go of everything else, literally let go around you, just to sort of be in awe and wonder for, what was essentially like a 30-minute, moment. So I think we see these types of trends across creators and dimensions. One of the other things that you'll see in the Find a Way work is looking at museums. So how do you go as a family, when you can't travel and experience art or experience culture, or when people do get outside? What I love about the idea of sharing and building community is they'll turn the camera on and you'll get to see their experience in a drive-by zoo and what that could actually do. And so I think it's the sharing and the communal aspect of YouTube that keeps it a powerful platform, because it is connecting people around the world and, again, right next door. And that has been an essential tool to survival in this period, but I think thriving over the last 15 years as a platform that has grown.
Amazing. And, I think there's so many opportunities in such a creator-driven platform. You see people coming in for anything under the sun. Now, when you're coming in as a brand and you're coming into that ecosystem, it's a completely different way. How do you recommend brands in today's world? It's a different place than it was 6 months ago. Bless. We all feel like it's been 10 years, and it's a different place than it was 15 years ago. If a brand is saying, okay, I've neglected my YouTube strategy from here, I've neglected a little bit of my Gen Z strategy, and I want to get onto the platform, but I don't want to come across as tone deaf. I don't want to, there are the obvious things of subject matter and topics and things like that, and being relevant and authentic to their brand. But how do you recommend that a brand either reconsider their existing strategy or come up with a new strategy utilizing YouTube in a way that is authentic and not offensive to the creator community that lives there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously, in my former roles, I've had to answer this question quite a lot. I think that what I've always said, I used to do this workshop for brands, because I'm like, think like a creator. What does a creator do every day? The thing about a creator is they show up. They build an audience. They are always there, thinking about, like, again, you talked about this, it's not just topicality, but it's like, who are you and what does your channel stand for? And what is the expectation of your audience in terms of what you're delivering each time you upload a video? As a brand, I would say my audit is, one, what do I have that is of value in terms of that value exchange with the audience, and what is of value to a Gen Z? Like, if I can be a brand from a CPG brand to an auto brand. What I offer is something, that is both useful. So is it utility, is it entertainment, or is it information? And I think about it across those three vectors and say, okay, now one, again, what is my brand? What is my unique and transparent voice that I'm going to show up with? And how do I sort of think about those three dimensions and offer a little of everything? If you're too dry, then they come to you for utility, but it's when they need you. If you're too funny, they've got a lot of other competition in that space. And it's not to say, but where's the relevancy and usefulness in my life? And then what's the information that I can buy when I'm searching, and how to ensure that your SEM and SEO strategy are aligned, as well as the content that you have is actually informative and interesting. So I think it's like, think like a creator, be consistent, be persistent, but again, just be authentic to who you are.
Amazing. And when we think about that creator community, dwelling a little bit more on that, because it's so central to YouTube and Gen Z and your approach to Gen Z. There was a New York Times article last week or the week before on the Gen Z mafia on the Discord platform and their desire to, quote, remake Silicon Valley in their own image. How do you, as the OG of creator communities, you are probably the original collab house, although a digital one at that. How do you handle upstart concerns like this that reflect a desire by Gen Z to own their own product or control their own destiny? What do you think it says about that generation, their approach, and how YouTube approaches Gen Z when specifically these concerns arise?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to be thoughtful about this response, because I think it requires not just, again, a quick to judgment, but I think like one thing I would say is, I think YouTube is big enough that you can build a community there where you feel like you have autonomy, or that you can actually shape that. I'm going to use a really interesting example to kind of talk about this. FarmTube. FarmTube is this beautiful gem of a community on YouTube. And, again, you'd probably think, well, what do farmers have to do on YouTube? But it is a collective. It's almost like, I mean, I grew up in Oklahoma and Texas. You had the FFA and you had sort of like adult, right? So that group. That's sort of now how you can connect on YouTube with farmers who are doing everything from music videos from their ranch to like, what are the best practices in terms of farming these days, whether it's organic farming or chicken farming, whatever that might be. It is a resource and a collective, if you will, online. So do you need to go actually have your own, or do you find your community on YouTube and actually build that presence? And when I go back to being a brand, it's like, can you imagine how many brands can participate in FarmTube authentically right now? And it's sort of a beautiful value exchange. It is, you have to remember, this is an economy. And so we want to make sure that those creators continue to thrive on the platform, not just because they're connecting and sort of sharing information among one another, but they can actually make a living there too, if that's what they choose to do.
I think that's the self-determination of that is the beauty of it, right? And I think, and the ability to find those communities. I feel your origins. I grew up in rural Indiana, surrounded three sides by cornfields. I have not checked out the FarmTube community, but I think this is now on my list.
We'll put it on the chat here, but it's look, having grown up, spent many summers on farms with my grandparents, and the boredom that sometimes ensues, I can see why this has become a popular
It actually brings up a beautiful intersection, which I am obsessed with personally, but I think we often neglect when we talk about the digital world, but YouTube actually seems to have a direct correlation to, and doesn't neglect, but is the intersection of the online and the offline. By their very nature, the videos that are going on YouTube, a lot of them intersect with people's real lives and things that they do. And, a lot of creators have grown up digitally on YouTube and then become even bigger creators across a multi-platform experience. True life celebrities, so to speak, as opposed to being in any individual category. As a platform, when you obviously consider the entire sort of cradle to grave of your creators and their entire lives, online and offline, where do you think we're headed in terms of being able to embrace the online and the offline? And how does YouTube look at that with a generation like Gen Z who lives in so much digital expression, probably more so than any generation before? I noticed all of my Gen Z friends prior to COVID spent all of their time posting everywhere they're at, going back to that transparency and authenticity. How do we manage that intersection of the online and the offline with Gen Z?
I think it's one of those questions that in a world where the experience has actually sort of been taken away. Like, what is the IRL moment? I think that one of the things that it really, and I want to actually expand our view of what IRL means, because I think as a creator, that could mean actually being able to meet in person. So if you think about what VidCon became and how amazing that was and its experience, if you've never been, it's pretty phenomenal. But the creators actually getting to connect with their fans. I think, if you are a creator who's known for cooking, like now you can have your own line of cookware. So the IRL experience is like, now I can take the instruction and bring it directly into your home through the tools and sort of books that we use to do this. You can think about, the way in which creators are becoming their own celebrity, selling their goods, or, monetizing their live streams. Or, I mean, we just did a live stream this year with Mr. Beast, and it was just like phenomenal. And the way in which people want to engage is just different. Like, or like another trend that I thought was fascinating is marbles have become a really big trend. And who knew that, like, playing marbles? And so now it's like there's a whole trading community of like marbles, and it's like, are you kidding me? But it's like fascinating. It's like Pokemon cards when the other generation before that was growing up. I think like what I've always enjoyed and what I think is magical about YouTube is that there is something for everyone. And when I think about IRL, my view of IRL is not just the ability to connect physically in the real world, but also to connect the possibility, the products, whatever that might be, in the real world as well. And I think that's why the creator community, when we talk about the economy of our creator community, it's much broader than just, collecting, revenue from the monetization through ads. It's actually, how do you think about expanding your product line, or your, as I said, your multi-hyphenated brand, whether you are doing that in traditional media or exclusively in sort of digital media.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I think that's really important. And we'll take, before we turn to audience Q&A, just two last questions on this front, which is, the first of which is, when we think about the community, what is it that you turn to YouTube for? You have probably one of the best architectural setups of backgrounds. So I don't know if it's interior design or your fashion style, which I'm in love with. But what is it that you turn to YouTube for on that front?
Truthfully, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and we learned to tie dye thanks to YouTube. So we've been doing, Phoebe, who's my 9-year-old daughter, we made masks for COVID, and so we learned to tie dye, and that was a big thing. And actually, the world of tie dye on YouTube is extraordinary. It's not your hippy dippy tie dyeing. It's very sophisticated. I've also, truthfully, I've taught myself to cook a lot more, and I love to fix things. Like, what I love about architecture is I love to buy old homes and fix them up, and I turn to YouTube to learn like the tricks of the trade. So I am no longer, wouldn't even qualify myself close to a Gen Z. I'm raising a Gen Z, but I think that for me, it's been like, how do I find resources to feel more capable in the world right now? And then it's about fun. I was actually on site for the David Blaine Ascension program. And I will tell you, Craig, it was just, it was like a moment where you held your breath and you thought, okay, well, I'm either getting my resume ready or we're going to be celebrating what will be, a feat of magic. And that was like, the fact that we can continue to bring those things, or even when Andrea Bocelli performed, and it was just the empty streets of the cities around the world, you just remember like everyone was collectively having the same experience. And here was a man who was able to transcend that through music. And watching the way the artists have turned to our platform to live stream, to think about how to stay connected. Imagine launching an album right now and not being able to be in a venue, but now you can be online and have a live stream experience that we can help you monetize as a way to sort of, again, it's about bridging where we are and where we are getting to, and hopefully, allowing most people to survive and thrive in those moments.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And the Bocelli piece of it, I think we've all seen some of those incredible moments. And what's interesting to me is that we've seen those replay time and time again on the YouTube platform as people have gone deeper and found just really meaningful experiences. And then those experiences populate new experiences and new attempts. I have a friend who's a podcaster, and he for PBS, and he has all of these YouTubers who recreate the last versions of his podcast. You see the same thing with the features from last week with Tonight with John Oliver. It becomes an obvious place for people that intersect and recreate their own version of the culture they see around them.
And what a beautiful like just like fanship. You know, I think that if you think about what YouTube is, it's a collection of creators and fans who love them and creators who are fans. And I think like that trend that we see of sort of recreation, like it's the best form of flattery, but it demonstrates your creativity, right? So I'm writing a love letter to my creator and I'm doing it through a version of my own, you know, my own expression of what I just saw or what I just heard. And I think that I love that flattery as video, or video as flattery.
Yeah, I love the community of that and the back and forth on that. I will turn to audience Q&A now, just for the last 10 minutes, some questions sent in by some of the folks watching us today. So the first question is, obviously Gen Z, we've talked at the very beginning that consumers really highly value that authenticity. How does a brand find that authenticity? What makes a brand authentic in 2020? You know, if you're not Nike and you're not, you know, you don't have the obvious ones, what is the process that you would look at from there?
I mean, I think, and this is sort of going back to like marketing 101, is what is your mission, your values, and what is your voice? And as those things are aligned, then you are being authentic. I think where your mission or values don't match your voice or vice versa, there is a disconnect. How do you act? What do you say? What do you stand for? How do you do that? Like, even so much as like, what is the tone of voice that you're using? How do we think about the way in which we show up? That if I were to say, this is the brand, and that actually feels like the voice that it would have based on my experience of the brand or my expectation of the brand. And so I think we're navigating precarious times as marketers. You know, I think we've got cancel culture and calling out culture, and it's just, again, I was having a discussion last night with another marketer about a response to some of the current, you know, the current climate. And it's like, if I looked at your last piece of work and I look at this piece, I feel a disconnect. And so when I, as like leading the brand team, do these pieces feel like I am the same person every time I show up? And you can imagine, if I put myself in a Gen Z, if my friends aren't showing up the way I expect them to be, or they're not consistent in the way they show up, I'm questioning their authenticity. I'm questioning, you know, the sort of who they are and how they're trying to be in the world. And so I think consistency is a really important piece of authenticity.
Amazing, and a great transition and tee up to our next audience question, which we've talked about briefly in sort of the multi-general and cross-generational aspect of this. But if you do show up consistently, how do you show up consistently and be there consistently for your existing, more mature audience base, whether it's a millennial like me or Gen X or boomers? And how do you not lose them and build Gen Z on there in a way in a time when there's so much risk and so much at play, and honestly, lots of companies can just be terrified to make a move, even though a move is what Gen Z and consumers want. They want you to say something, but they want you to say something that's true and real and honest to where they are. How do you balance that consistency with also the need to, if you are a brand that has to be multi-generational, to appeal to Gen Z without losing your existing base?
Yeah, you know, again, I'm one marketer. I've had some experience in my career. I've had to navigate some very tricky situations, you know, and everything from my first, I mean, gosh, you guys, I was in my first days at MySpace having to manage like what it meant to actually be a social media platform. But, you know, I think that the key thing is it is consistency. Also that don't always take yourself so seriously. Like there is a way to show up in a consistent manner that doesn't, you still have your values, but maybe your voice with a Gen is just a little lighter, or the tone isn't as, perhaps be careful of being pedantic, right? Like how are they consuming information? Are you on the right platform? Are you using the tools? I would say, and this is what I actually woke up the other day thinking, do I have enough Gen Z marketers on my team? Do I have enough diverse talent to help me see some of the blind spots because of maybe the way that I move through the world that shaped my own experience, to be able to make sure I have you know, a wider sort of aperture of the way the world is moving, and urban areas and rural areas among, you know, a diverse set of constituents. And Gen Z, I think, you know, I think that what I would say about Gen Z is I do feel that if you engage them, they can help shape the way they want to be spoken to and the things that they care about. And so I've watched brands, and I'm sure we can all look at the last 3 months and say, how did brands show up? Do yourself a favor, go and audit the COVID response from brands, go and audit the racial justice response from brands, see if they're the same, see if they feel like the same brand having the conversation about how to be helpful for users and how to talk about issues that sometimes make us uncomfortable, but we must talk about in order for there to be real change. And I would say, like, but also, I think Gen Z, what I would ask Gen Z is that just like a parent or just like a friend, if I'm asking to be shaped and where I make mistakes, be sort of told that in an effort to actually get better, I want the space to be better. You know what I mean? And I don't want the cancel culture. How do I continue to engage in a conversation around how to get better? Because I don't think we're always going to get it right. And I think that paralysis that we all feel because we're afraid to take the risk to say the right thing that may alienate one or the other, well, let's just be honest about that too. We want to show up in the right way. We're not sure how to do that. Perhaps our brand history doesn't allow us to be, you know, the lead of this march, but at least we want to be a participant in it.
Absolutely. And then as we look at that, oh, and it looks like I think we're running short on time. So one final 60-second top line. What do you see as your top trend that you're looking out for in 2021?
Oh, you know what? I want to figure out how to balance. Helping the world feel more connected with also just what are the right moments that we can actually have a little levity. I think it's been it is like one after another, and I think people are just weary. And I think, like, for those that are sort of continuing to sort of be on the front lines of all parts of this conversation and this pandemic, it's like we want to continue to prop them up. But I would like to look next year about, like, what do we learn? How do we change? What is the opportunity to be better? And find the ways as a brand through our creator community and through our users who engage with them every day, like, what is it that they will be looking for? What is it that they're seeking? And begin to identify that as a way to amplify it, because perhaps we're all seeking the same thing regardless of the letter after our generation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Angela. And thank you so much to Brand Innovators for having us for this fireside chat.
Super fun. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's crazy. So I'm working from home. Obviously, my girlfriend is a 7th and 8th grade teacher, and this year they always ask the kids what they want to be when they grow up. And the number one answer this year is a YouTube star or a YouTuber. So it's really, I'm grateful for that you're thinking so much about the value exchange. I think with YouTube, the value exchange isn't just like a publisher, a marketer, and audience anymore. It is the creator platform, and really, like, what enables this kind of content to be authentic. So I do think it's really important to be mindful of how the value exchange is evolving, and definitely got a lot of that in your answers, Angela. So thank you, and thank you, Craig, for moderating a great fireside chat.
Thanks, Casey. Guys,
thank you so much.
All right. So we are going to keep the content rolling. Our next speaker